Morning everybody and welcome to my next Get a Life moment with myself, Lisa Davies. Now today I'm joined with a good friend of mine, he's a bit of a nutter really, because he's run across the Sahara, he's run across Namibia. Now for me, I'm only running if something's chasing me, but quite an incredible person you're going to meet today. Andy McMenemy, who is a clinical hypnotherapist and one of my colleagues as well. We work together some of the time. Welcome, Andy.
Good morning, Lisa, and good morning, everyone listening in.
So, for those people who don't know just what a nutter you are, running up into hill and down dale, that's what you used to do quite a lot of, who is Andy McMenemy?
That's a good question, isn't it? Who
Who are you?
Well, I suppose I'm like everyone else. I'm the sum total of all of my life experiences, and running across the Sahara and running across Namibia was part of a journey, I guess, Lisa. I spent 22 years in the corporate world, in a career in various divisions of the motor industry. So, I started at the age of 26 when I came back to the UK, having lived abroad for most of my life. My father was a career soldier, so wherever they lived, wherever Dad was posted, Mum, myself, and my brother, we went there too. So we saw a lot of the world. But I came back to the UK at the age of 26 and eventually started a part-time job in the motor industry as a car cleaner, cleaning cars in a showroom, etc. To cut a very long story short, 22 years later, I was running £17 million divisions in 1.3 billion, £500 million organisations with responsibility for results and inspiring and looking after the teams that reported to me. And I collapsed through stress at the height of that journey. I never saw it coming. My body was giving me signals, my mind was giving me signals, but because I was focused and locked onto what I was doing, I just, I ignored them. And when I say I collapsed through stress, it wasn't just I'm feeling off it for a couple of days. No, a full-on collapse into a convulsive fit.
Wow.
So it was a huge wake-up call for me. And it started my journey on, self-care, starting to look after myself, look after my health. I never forget the words the consultant shared with me at that time, after having done a battery of tests and 24 hours of sleep deprivation and electrodes all over my head and, ECG printouts. And they said, there's no sign on your heart trace or your brain trace, and if for any reason why this should have happened to you, you are overweight and your blood pressure is a little bit elevated, but it's not in the area that would cause a significant concern. So I suggest you have a real good look at your lifestyle, your coping mechanisms, because you must be under an immense amount of stress.
So it was a wake-up call then, a real wake-up call.
And your way isn't working. Yeah, absolutely. And you've been ignoring it, and your your brain has decided it's time for you to pay attention.
Yeah.
And so, the journey of self-care and getting back into a degree of discipline as far as my health and my fitness was concerned, was what led me to start seeking things that inspired me and wanted to take myself into a new direction and test my potentials.
Now, the average person wants something to inspire them. Maybe they might study something new or, take a long walk across the moors. But no, you don't do things by half. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to doing such running feats as you went on to do.
In my corporate career, we attend many conferences, etc., that were put on by manufacturers and organisations that we supported or were attached to. And I saw many, many different types of inspirational speakers that, planted little messages, I guess, in my subconscious that spoke to my potential, that spoke to, things inside of me that excited me, that energized me, that drew my attention. Adventure was one of them. And I remember listening to two speakers in particular, some sort of 7 years apart. And after I'd collapsed, my brain was kind of going back over all of these areas of thinking about things that had inspired me and what could I do. Yeah. And I remember listening to these speakers, and both of them spoke about having completed something called the Marathon des Sables, the toughest foot race in the world. And it was 5.5 marathons back to back across the Sahara. carrying everything you need to survive in a rucksack. And Lisa, when I reflected back on it, I said, you said to yourself, Andy, one day you were going to do something like that because you were inspired by the enthusiasm they put into their story. And both of those speakers that told that story had every reason in the world for not even considering taking on the toughest foot race in the world, because one of them was blind and the other one was a double amputee.
Yeah.
And they both succeeded. The blind runner with the help of his sighted guide, and the double amputee with his determination, his tenacity, and his grit. And I suppose I found myself at that point in my life thinking, do I have those qualities? I know there's more inside of me, but how do I unlock it?
Yeah.
And so that was the inspiration. And I thought, I wonder if I could. And
I guess if you're watching somebody who's blind and somebody who's a double amputee, you kind of say to me, well, if they've done it, why shouldn't I be able to do it? Although I don't get those feelings, Andy. I know what you've done.
And I still remember Miles Hilton Barber's words today. He said, the walls that we build around us, prevent us stepping out. And we build those walls. It's our own limiting beliefs, and I thought, yeah. So if I wanted to, how would I start the process? And can I find people that have already succeeded? And can I earn their trust, and can I earn their respect enough for them to share with me how they succeeded,
Yeah.
And so I phoned Miles and I contacted him. I told him he'd inspired me, and I asked him for advice, and he gave me some great advice that set me off on that journey.
And so you did. You ran the Marathon des Sables.
I did, and I crossed the finishing line with a very good friend of mine, and I thought, well, it couldn't have been the toughest foot race in the world if I succeeded. But, let's be honest, there were sort of some 870 runners from 35 different nationalities attempting the toughest foot race in the world that year. And, many of them finished.
So it shows that if you can conceive it in your mind's eye, you can achieve it. With a lot of training, I take it. A lot of training.
And I remember the first run that I joined the running club local to where I lived. And on a Wednesday night in the middle of winter, in fact, it was the 6th of January, they ran a sort of 5-mile loop around the village. And I couldn't run, 3 miles without stopping. I stopped for a stitch that I didn't have. It was an excuse. And I stopped to tie a shoelace that wasn't undone because it was an excuse just to stop and get some breath, So it was so funny. And I didn't have the courage to tell them the only reason I joined the club is because I was trying to break the inertia, because in 18 months I was tackling the toughest foot race.
So that was kind of 0 to, the biggest ever. It's 0 to 100 in like 18 months. Incredible.
But, we all have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the decision is that stimulates us to take action. There is a start point for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest mistake many people make is comparing themselves with people that are much further along the journey. And it's just not fair, because if you compared yourself with them at the start of their journey, they'd be just the same as you.
Yeah. Yeah, they start from that base.
They say, how did you do it? I said, I just joined a local running club. Oh, I couldn't do that. I can't run at all. Exactly. Neither could I.
So you completed that and then thought, what next? Up for an adventure. So then you decided that wasn't quite tough enough if I could achieve that. So what shall I do next? So what did you do next?
Well, a friend sent me an email at the end of that year, because the longest day in the sort of 5.5 days of running across the Marathon des Sables is a 52-mile day. So on day 4, when you're absolutely shattered, you're hurting everywhere, they really stretch the distance to double, just to test your determination and your tenacity and your want it factor, if you like. And so this email said, have you seen this race in Namibia? They're going to stretch the tenacity factor, and they're going to attempt to run 3 marathons or 78 miles in 24 hours across the oldest desert on the planet. And so I was intrigued. I thought, well, okay, could I do that? Because that would be massive.
I like the way you say, I was intrigued.
Yeah, well, I thought I know what it took to complete the Marathon des Sables, and I thought 52 miles took it out of me. But if it was only on one day, what's the furthest I could run? Could I achieve that? And it was brutal, Lisa. It was, 46 degrees centigrade at sort of 10 o'clock in the morning.
A bit toasty then, a bit warm.
Yeah, a bit toasty. But, I succeeded. I finished in second place against somebody who was at that time sort of 13th in the world.
Wow.
And that was kind of a wake-up call for me that, I've got this thing called stamina. I've got this thing called tenacity. I can, follow my inspiration, and I can put the work in, and I can put the effort in, and I can generate results that I'm happy with.
So now we've covered off the Marathon des Sables, and you've run across Namibia. What next?
Well, the pleasure was mine then to inspire other people to do the same. And I remember receiving an email and a telephone call from the BBC asking if I would help them to support one of their presenters who had taken on the idea of either challenging themselves with the Marathon des Sables or running across Namibia, and which one did I think they could achieve. And I said, well, I suppose they could achieve either, but, what's their running experience? What's their, how many marathons has he run so far? And they said, well, it's not a he, it's a she. Oh, and I said, okay, fair enough. The first thing we should never do is prejudge.
Yeah, never assume. Yeah.
Never assume. And it was Helen Skelton. So I had the opportunity to kind of give Helen some insights into what that journey was going to be like for her. I couldn't train her because I wasn't a personal trainer. I didn't have the insurance necessary for the BBC. But my very good friend Rory took that sort of mantle on because he was a personal trainer. But Rory had never been to the Namibian desert and had never experienced that race. So my job was to prepare Helen mentally and give her some really great insights that she could tap into. So having helped someone else to complete the challenge, I then thought to myself, well, what's next for me then? I've tackled the toughest foot race in the world. I've done something arguably a bit more tougher. And now I've been able to inspire other people to do the same thing. So what really is my potential? Where could I go? And I came across this American runner who was called Mr. Ultra Marathon Man, Dean Karnassis. And Dean was a branded athlete, sponsored athlete for North Face, the clothing company who wanted to break into extreme endurance arena. And he put on this tremendous event called Enduro 50, where he ran 50 marathons in 50 days in each of the 50 states of America mainland. So, tremendous logistical challenge and phenomenal, experience it must have been. So that was, I wonder what the world record is then. What's the most anyone's ever done? Because, I've done 5.5 marathons in a week. I've done 3 in one day. He's done 50 in 50 days. I wonder what the most that is humanly possible is. And the Guinness World Record at that time was 52 marathons in 52 days with no day's rest.
Okay.
And I thought, I wonder why Mr. Ultra Marathon Man stopped at 50 when clearly the same successful process would have, if he'd applied it for another 3 days, would have given him a world record. And then my little gobby boy said, go on,
I can do that. Go on, if you think you're hard enough, you do it.
So I did. I wrote to Guinness World Records, I put it on paper, and I set out to do exactly that. And then I found a friend of mine sent me an email a little while into the planning and preparation. He said, have you seen what this Belgique runner's doing, Andy? I said, no. I said, funny enough, he's contesting the same world record you are. Because we always have, in business, we've always got competitors, haven't we?
Yeah.
And this was no different. But they said, he's already on day 47, and he's got a little bit more of a bigger insight to his tenacity than you, because he's going to run a marathon a day for 365 days.
And you're like, oh, right, okay.
So my event was strategically planned to support a military charity that looks after UK veterans. And so mine was contained to the UK. He was containing his to Europe. So I just decided, well, okay, I'll scale it up then. What's the next most difficult distance than a marathon? And Guinness said, well, look, we don't have anything on the record books, but there is the International Association of Ultra Marathons. And they start at 50 kilometers a day, which is 31 miles. Then they go to 100 kilometers a day, and then it's 200 kilometers a day. And I thought, well, I'll take the easy one. I'll go for
easy by your standards, Andy.
Record in the 50 kilometers per day category, or 31.7 miles per day. And so, yeah, that's what I set out to do, and succeeded.
Yeah, and did it. And you've been very coy there, because I happen to know that you tore your Achilles tendon on day 2.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? There's sometimes
and still kept running.
sometimes things come out of the woodwork that we don't expect. And yes, unfortunately for me, on the second day, I tore my Achilles tendon. Now, I fortunately did have a sports injury therapist on the team, because we had a lot of sponsors paying a lot of money to support the effort and to raise brand awareness for themselves and also for the military charity. So it was diligent, due diligence told us we needed to have a contingency. But, Sophie was, is a lovely woman. At that time, she was only out of university for 5 months, having qualified as a sports injury therapist and setting up her own business. So this was one of the great opportunities for her to do something on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
And so it became her challenge, if you like, on day 2. And I said, Sophie, when she diagnosed it, I got this sensation that I'd kicked a thorn into my sock, really sort of sharp stabbing pain. It got progressively more niggly as the day went on. And it happened about 5 miles into the day. And Sophie had a look at the Achilles and said, look, I can feel a nodule there, and I can see it's very red. I think you've torn your Achilles tendon. So she did some tests and said, I'm going to do a bit of research. And she came back with a diagnosis and said, yes, it was a tendinopathy. And I said, so what do we do? She goes, I haven't got a clue, because I've never worked with an athlete, who thinks he can run 31 miles on a torn Achilles tendon. And the conventional medical wisdom is to rest it, ice it, compress it, elevate it, until it starts to heal. Yeah. So clearly that wasn't going to be an option on day 2 of a 66-day event. And I don't mean just because it was an ego thing. I mean, we had spent a year planning and preparing the event. We'd organised civic receptions in each of the 66 city dignitaries after the event each day. The media were there to cover the event and also to promote the charity. And there were 13 regional charity fundraising teams, driving awareness of the brand for the charity and trying to raise as much money as possible. We were trying to raise £1,000 per city, £66,000, So there was a lot of kind of pressure to keep going forward, really, as long as I could.
But you did it, and you achieved it.
For the first time under active medical science, a therapist supported an athlete and encouraged him to run that injury back to health with no day's rest. So it was a tremendous achievement and a fascinating experience. And the only thing I'll take credit for is my attitude, my positive mental attitude around it, and my kind of work ethic. But all the credit has to lie with the team, with Sophie for her medical experience and her tenacity, and the team for lifting my spirits and supporting me and enabling me just to concentrate on one foot in front of the other, if you like, whilst they did everything else. So we succeeded as a team.
In terms of the charity, you raised a lot more than £66,000 in the end, didn't you?
The social media is a wonderful thing for capturing people's imagination, and we were very supported and very encouraged by the level of support we got. And eventually, when we tallied up everything at the end of the event, when everything was said and done, a couple of months later, I think we'd raised over £450,000 of, funds for the charity, great publicity and media coverage across the whole of the UK.
Incredible. So we've heard the story so far. We've heard the story from, returning to the UK, becoming a car cleaner, rising to the heights of the corporate pole, if you like, and falling flat down as a result of that, and then taking on some major challenges. So move us forward a little bit further in time then. How did you get from being young car cleaner to standing on stages, inspiring thousands of people, becoming a clinical hypnotherapist, coaching executives, managing directors? How did that happen?
It was something I always wanted to do. I received an enormous amount of guidance, support, mentoring, coaching, through people that looked at me with someone that had potential. And I remember people pulling me aside and saying, Andy, you've got so much inside of you that you're not bringing to the table. And we can see it in you. What's stopping you from unlocking it? So I was very fortunate, and I felt obliged when I got to a position where I could share with other people and help them to ignite their dream and their passions, that I had a duty to do that. So the opportunity arose to share from stage inspiration on how I did things. And I really enjoyed doing that. And I could see people's eyes coming alight with You know, dreams that, like I had, they parked in a place I call One Day Isle.
Yeah.
You know, one day I'll get round to it. Well, when are you going to get round to it? I say to people, you know, I'll give you £1,000 if you can open a diary and show me a page that says one day. It doesn't. There's a specific day of a specific week and a specific month and year, but there isn't one that says one day.
Yeah.
So, you know, if it's exciting you, if it energizes you, and if you'd like to do it and have that feeling of satisfaction, do it.
Yeah.
So that's where the kind of inspiration came from. The journey into developing the positive psychology and the mental attitude and helping people to kind of build their tenacity and their persistence, and also their fall in love with their potential. That kind of came from the coaching work that I did. And I remember receiving a call from a young friend and client, ex-military veteran, who said, you know, can we go for a walk in the hills? I'd like to have some time just to get some advice from you on some particular challenges I'm facing. And we went for a sort of a 5-hour walk. And we were kind of walking about 3 miles an hour, I guess, across the hills. And he was talking at 50 miles an hour all the way through, and declared halfway through that he was suicidal as a result of just an overwhelming sense of burden and, you know, just pressure. And I felt massively out of my depth. You know, I was frightened because my way with people who are focused and locked on is to give tough love. You know, to tell them the brutal truths they need to know so that they can get on with it, not necessarily what they want to hear. And I was petrified I would say the wrong thing. And I felt massively out of my depth. And just didn't know what to do. So I said to myself, I'll never find myself in that position again. And then my curiosity picked up, well, okay, so what skill sets would I need to have in order to feel competent, confident, and capable of supporting somebody who is traumatized and massively distressed?
And
I'm qualified as a clinical hypnotherapist.
And so that took you on that journey towards becoming a therapist, which it sounds like there's a pattern to the way that, you know, I hear that pattern in the way that you talk about things, that you're always seeking out, okay, so what would I need to become in order to do that? What would I need to learn in order to fulfill that? And that seems to be kind of an unsaid mantra that's running throughout everything that we're talking about, Andy, really. So what's next for you, Andy? What are your aspirations? What are you working on? What's next?
Well, I suppose like everyone, Lisa, you know, I'm looking at the current environment we're living in, thinking, you know, where can I bring some value? How can I support, guide, inspire, encourage, you know, the people that are out there that are hurting at the moment? And, you know, I've sadly heard of a couple of suicides in the last couple of days as a result of what we're facing at the moment. And I don't think we've ever faced anything like this. I was working at the time of the last recession, 2007, 2008. I left the industry I was in 2008. And it was a really difficult time, you know, 2009, 2010, austerity. And I put Challenge 66 on the paper in 2010. But, you know, we didn't have this overwhelming fear and anxiety around a pandemic attached to that recession. And here we are with a pandemic going into what everyone's telling us is going to be a very severe recession. You know, the amount of redundancies we're seeing, the amount of stress, anxiety and depression is just
we've worked together for many years now on leadership retreats, and we see a level of stress in the workplace with groups that we have worked with over the years, but that's nothing to what we're potentially facing now, is it?
It isn't, and you know, it's challenging to give people hope and faith that they can get through it. I was talking with a couple of clients, you know, a couple of days ago, and they're in danger of losing their house. They've got directors' indemnities against the business, and their house is collateral. And you can imagine the kind of anxiety that's going through them if they can't find a solution. And so it really is a time to support and to be there for people that we know are struggling and challenging. And some of them, you know, because of pride, they might not share openly what's going on inside of them. But, you know, if we're astute enough to look at people, to listen, we can hear and see things they're not saying. And our job, and my job certainly as a therapist, is first of all to listen very accurately to what I'm hearing, and obviously to observe what I'm seeing, and then to have the courage to ask those uncomfortable questions that can unlock the areas that they need guidance in. And so I'm really focused at the moment on developing an online stress course, which I can share with people, some great tips and techniques that they can use to, to bring themselves down from that elevated plane of anxiety and emotional distress, and back to a center of balance where they can start to take rational decisions on how they move forward.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying the conversations. Yeah.
It's very difficult to make those rational choices and decisions when you're in that state of heightened emotion, isn't it? So
we become hijacked by our emotions. The body's natural defense mechanism is to drive the stress response system, as you know. And so we become hijacked by very strong emotions. And the first thing we have is this sense of fear or threat. And then we're running, the adrenaline's pumping, the cortisol's pumping. And when it goes on for a long time, it becomes chronic stress, and it's very degrading in the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stress doesn't live in our head. Stress lives in our body.
Yeah, and it manifests physically, doesn't it, in all sorts of ways, as we know.
Ironically, one of the first things that, chronic stress and massive secretion of cortisol does is to down-regulate the immune system.
Yeah.
Why would we ever want to compromise our immune system when we're in a pandemic?
Absolutely.
And we can't see the threat, and we can't smell it, taste it, Once it's into our body, that's it. The immune system's already compromised, and now we're trying to fight something that is devastating.
Stop watching the news. That's the first thing. Stop watching the news.
Yeah, well, we need to get information, and we need to have qualified sources of information. But I think we need to dial down the volume and the amount of information we're taking in.
Yeah.
So just check in. But I think more than anything, it's helping people to appreciate being disciplined, being safe, being secure, sort of bringing themselves down from stressful situations and controlling their stress, and looking after their self-care.
Yes.
And helping to promote, good immune regulation.
Yeah, and in some cases, as we've been through that staying at home stage, there's been positives to it as well, haven't there? More time, a better balance, more time with family. Yeah. And so recognising and appreciating and having gratitude for the simple things in daily life and recognising
I think you've hit it right on the nail there with gratitude, I think if we come out of the end of this journey through this COVID pandemic, and through the winter and into springtime, and we haven't learned something about ourselves, and we haven't, evolved ourselves, then there's something far wrong.
Yeah,
so I think we absolutely need to be looking at ourselves in greater detail, practicing gratitude for all of the things that we're doing well, learning new skills and new coping mechanisms that can help us to face these challenges, and wherever possible, finding the opportunity to inspire others, to lift them up, to guide them and inspire them. Through this challenge, because we'll all get through it together.
We will, absolutely. And before we end today then, Andy, as I ask all of my guests, share with us, what do you feel would be your top tip for life that you could give to our viewers and listeners?
Wow, that's a great question. Top tip for life. Well, as individuals and as a species, as humans, we're kind of constantly evolving. We're always looking to move forward. So I would think the first thing to do is just to, in a moment of quiet reflection, in a moment where they take a breath and they just take a step out of the busyness of life, and just to reflect on, where would I like my potential to lead me? Because potential's amazing. It's always sitting out there on our horizon, waiting for us to make a choice in the right direction. And it will give us whatever it is that we want, provided we make that choice and take that step. So I'd say just one great tip for life is, life will give you whatever it is that you want. We're all going through difficult times, but just like the seasons, nothing is permanent.
No.
We're going through autumn, we'll go into winter, and sure enough, it will be springtime and it will be summertime again. So, even though we're going through dark times and difficult times, they're not permanent. They won't last forever. Yeah. So what would we like to be on the other end of that? What would we like to be that is pulling us forward? Many people go through life being pushed by their circumstances and not pulled by the power of their dreams. And so I'd say if you've got a fantastic dream or something that, is pulling you in that direction, make it a goal, because that's completely different. When you put a date on it, it becomes a goal, and then start moving in the direction of that, because it will energize you, it will inspire you, and it will give you that kind of passion and that purpose.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been my absolute pleasure chatting with you this morning, Andy.
Mine too.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Lisa. Cheers, everyone.